Today's presentation is about simplifying the UI of complex data result sets. So that's quite a wide topic. One central thing is sometimes you try to do a UI, you have large amounts of data and you want to present them to the user in a way it's easy to understand what he needs to do. And that's not always the same way as Power Builder offers it, just with a table to edit. And I'm talking about these cases where you might need to take a little more effort to make a great user experience anyway. And I'm going to show you some ideas how you could do that. Just a disclaimer, I think you know that by now. That's the agenda. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about UX design with Power Builder in general. What can you do to make your UX or user experience, user design interface better? Then I'm going to talk about user-centric design. That's what I explained before at the title slide. And then there's the main part, how to save and load data. So if your data window isn't directly connected to the database, like if you're just editing a table, you can't just execute the update command and then it's updated, but you need to get the data into that data window and pull it out afterwards. And there's some techniques about this. Main part is the matrix table. I'm going to show that in detail afterwards. Then maybe you want to update some joined information. If you join something into it, but you can't save it directly with the data window, you might want to retrieve it and put it back in. And then the part I announced yesterday at the presentation, it's about Graphical UI. How do you save and load data with those drag and drop and other graphical data windows? All right. About me, so I don't need to mention a lot more because I told that yesterday and you were pretty much all there. And George, I'm into Power Builder for 9 years. I think a lot of you have a lot more years, but I started pretty young and maybe some ideas are interesting to you anyway. My company, we do a business software. We have a lot of modules delivering mainly to the construction material companies. Main set is all developed in Power Builder, but we do a lot of customer adaptations for every customer. So we can do projects with pretty big customers that would use SAP or something like that if it wasn't with us, because we can fulfill their needs with customer adaptations. Okay, well, let's get into the stuff. UX design with Power Builder. I always hear people saying Power Builder has nothing to do with a cool UI. They're always complaining that Appeon should enable them to make cooler UIs. Well, I just say, if you're not able to do a cool UI with current Power Builder, you shouldn't hope for Appeon just making that for you, because you need to do that yourself. And current Power Builder versions, they have some glitches, some problems, I agree, but it's totally possible to do a cool UI. I'm going to show some examples afterwards. Well, what really helps and what we did is ask a designer to do some to help you get the design, how to do it, how to make it look good. But you need to ask that designer to make a flat design, keep it flat, because flat design is the only thing Power Builder can do in a proper way. I think you can do 3D elements or drop shadows or stuff like that, but that really looks shitty. So But if you keep it flat, all you need is rectangles, circles, text. I think I mentioned that yesterday, and that's totally going to work. It also helps to do mockups, to design on a different software. We often use PowerPoint. That's really helpful, but there's also tools especially done for mockups. And if you think just about the design without thinking about how you do it, before you even start programming, you're thinking another way about how to do your software UX design, and that helps doing thinking about what does the user want instead of how do I do it the easiest way in PowerBuilder. And if you did that design, you can just try to make it possible with PowerBuilder. And my experience is almost every time it's doable. Sometimes you need to find a solution. Maybe next year I'm going to make a presentation about working around the PowerBuilder glitches to make your designs possible. I already thought of that. But my experience is it's almost every time it's possible to do it. And then that's what I just told. Well, that's some general hints in design. I always see those button-faced GUIs, and usually button face is just ugly, or it just makes your application look like 1995. And if you want that, some customers really want that. They like it. But if you want to look your application a little bit more modern, I recommend white background. Then don't put in graphical elements where it's not needed. It just looks like it's done by an engineer and not done by a designer. An engineer makes boxes and lines, and so he thinks it makes it clearer, but in the end it's more like you're working in Excel and you just found out how to do lines or borders, and then you make borders everywhere. So if every graphical elements you can leave out, that helps your design. Then I strongly recommend just use one font and even just one size. In our business software we always use Arial size 10 over the whole application. Only exception is reporting. We use font size 9 there, but over the rest of the applications it's just font size 10. And that makes it better. Sometimes you think you need to make a title bigger, or something doesn't fit in, so you make it smaller. Just don't do that. And important thing, use data windows for everything. If I want to do a drop down, just a single drop down, without any data needed or whatever, I use a data window and put the drop down in there, because that's the only way to do a good user experience. With the controls on the window, well, the button works fine, but almost everything else, it's not gonna give you what you need. But with the data window, it usually works pretty well, and you have more possibilities to make it look the right way. So much about UX design. User-centric design. Well, PowerBuilder gives you a really easy way to work really fast. So that usually ends in your UI design is the same as a database design. You have a table, and then you display that table exactly the way it is on the database. And for most cases, that's totally fine. But there are some cases where you might want to design it differently. I'm going to come with some examples afterwards. And that's when I'm talking about user-centric design. Not thinking about how to do it the easiest way, but thinking about how does the user want it. So of course you could adapt your database design to make it look like you want the design to look for the user, but that might end up in a shitty database design that's hard to maintain. So you need to work something in between. So just make a easy understandable UX design that's simple to use, but that's harder to save and load the data. Okay. That's one of that's my example I'm working with. I don't think it's something you really would implement like that, but it's just an easy example to understand what I'm saying. Let's say we do have some projects to redecorate our office. We want new tables. We want do some paintings on some walls, and then we might want to build some new walls between some offices. And then we want to make a budget for that. We have our year 2019, and then we have the months, and we put in some amounts. Where do we want to spend what amount of money for doing that? So in the database, that's stored like this. You have the project, of course. That would be in a separate project table with an ID, and then you have the month, just the date, and then the amount. So you could add as much entries as you want, and then in the GUI, you want to display it that way because it's much easier for the user to understand. He just can put in a number at any field, and it's going to save it in the database that way. And that way you can use it for all kinds of reporting. You can calculate with that, and that's the way you want to have it on the database. Okay, but how to do that in Power Builder? I have 4 stages of evolution here. First stage of evolution would be the crosstab. And I think you all know the crosstab, and that's just not really doing the job. It's really hard to make a cool design with it, and it's even harder to maintain. You just change your SQL syntax, just a new field or something really tiny. You go back and all your design is lost. That's not a thing we can do. So there's the second stage. You just take a tabular data window, make a lot of subselects for each column. In this example, for each month, you do a subselect, and then design each column individually. That's a hard job to do. It's really laborious to build and to maintain, but at least you can design it however you want, and you can maintain it in some way. At least it's possible, but that's not where we're going. Next step is the partially dynamic tabular data window, and that's where we're going. We do a select with just casts, just empty fields. We put them into the data window, but we don't design or align them. We're going to code that afterwards by using modify. That's pretty easy to design, pretty efficient to build. It's not that much lines of code. I'm going to show that in my demo afterwards, and it's pretty easy to maintain. Only limitation here is you have a limited number of columns you can do. So you need to decide in advance. Let's say you do 30 columns or 50 or whatever. For me, that wasn't an issue yet. That's always been working. But if that's an issue, you have another option. You can do a fully dynamic tabular data window. You create the data window in a dynamic way. That's pretty complex regarding the columns, because creating columns dynamically is not that easy. They're linked in a very special way. It's not that easy to understand. I think we don't have time in this hour to go into that. If you are interested in that, you can come to me afterwards, and I can explain how to do that. I never did, but I did similar things, so I know it's possible. Okay. Now we do that table with we do the visual data window with just empty fields, and now we need to get the data into it. So we need to save it and we need to load it. So we have that visible data window, what I was talking about, and then we have a data store. In the data store we do a simple select, in this case from the budget, and the visible data window is just a select from the project with all those empty columns. Then first step is we just retrieve both of the data windows. Second step, we loop through the data store, the budget data store, and fill all the information into the visible data window. Third step, if anything's changed on the visible data window, we do a set item back on the data store where we want to store the data, and in the end we just save the data store. We never save the visible data window. That's just the general way how we do it. And now let's get into the code. I forgot before. I wanted to show you our ERP software. You were here yesterday, so you've already seen it. But just one thing, we did the white background. But with white background, it's a little bit harder to make input fields visible in a good way. So we use that blue background for input fields. That helps to find them. And for button face, you have the opposite. The background is button face, and then the input feels white. But if the background's white, you can just do that, for example. All right. And another thing, we did the menu like that. We did that ourselves, because the normal menu you see in the classical Windows menu is pretty limited. It's okay for a basic simple application, but if you want to go further with user experience, I think you need to do something yourself. And that's just data window with drawed. That's drawed with modify the contents, and that's data window as well with some lines in it, and then some text, and that's it. Okay, I think I need to close that because I'm going to connect to the database. That's not going to work otherwise. So we're working in Power Builder 2017 R3. The example, if you don't have it already, it's the same as yesterday. If somebody wants to take that link again, that's where you can download it. It's just another target. The target this time is called Matrix, like the movie. Okay, all set. There we go. Just going to show you how it's going to look before. Basic matrix is we have a visual data window. That's just a visual data window without any graphical things done before. So that's just how we do it. I just created that visual data window here. I just did 12 columns for the example, but it's pretty easy to do more. So if you go on the select, you have just a select and you take the columns you want to display. You take it just right in, select from the project table, and then add those casts. With those numbers, it's pretty easy to add them. I'm just going to show you. If I wanted to do more, I would do that. Then go here, mark that row, paste it a few times, and then I can just go in there like that. It's pretty fast, and so you can do like 50 or 70 columns with not that much effort. You can do that in maybe 2 minutes, so that's not an issue. I just place the columns in here. It doesn't matter where you place them. They just shouldn't go out too far, because if they're out very far on the right and you're going to move them back left with modify, you're going to have a scroll bar. And if they're never that far out right, you don't get the scroll bar too far out. Okay. Then I just did the total in the right with computed down here and computed here. This computed is pretty much manual. That's just adding every column in a little bit laborious way. Reason I did it that way, I tried to add that computed expression by modify. Problem is, it doesn't work. I don't know why. It just doesn't. But if you do it that way, it works. So you need to take a just a notepad and add those columns. You might even write the code to create that and then copy it out of the debugger and paste it in here. There's many methods to do that, but it's pretty much doable, and it at least works. And then you can sum up from that works as well. Okay, that's the first step. I'm not going to save that. Second step, I'm going to draw the statics and computed fields. So I want the title up there, and I want the total line, and that's all computed fields. Just sum over all groups. You can also do groups if you want to, and then draw those computed fields into the groups. And there I just create that computed fields. I'm going to show you that in the code. That would be matrix 2. So the code of the first one is pretty easy. It's just a retrieve for the first one. So the second one, I added this of_init function, and there I do a loop from 1 to 12 because I have 12 columns. Then I create the header text. Just create text. And compute it in the summary, and I just put in the text or the expression for the sum, and of course the exposition. The exposition is calculated from usually you do that by instance variables, where you set how do I want to align them, how wide is one field, width of a field, width of my entire thing, and then maybe a border in the right or on the top or whatever. So that's how you draw the static and computed fields. Next step is we need to align the input fields. So I told you, if you do it completely dynamically, it's pretty hard to do it with creation of the input fields. That's why I already created the input fields in the visual data window, so I just have to align them. If I need to create them, that's a little bit harder. You can do that, but it's a little bit weird. So I just align them. Looks like that. We already have our matrix view, and then I'm going to show you how to do that in the code. That's matrix 3. Just modify that the column is called amount plus the number of where I am, and then the width or the X position, and that's it. Okay, so far about aligning the graphics. That was pretty easy. If you want to add background colors to those fields, or maybe that's a lot of stuff in design, concerning design, you can do. You can all do that within that loop. It's not making it too slow. Well, thing is, if you want to design already in the visual data window, that's going to cause you problems as soon as you want to change anything, because then you need to change each and every column. If it's 12, it's maybe doable, but if it's 30 or 50, that's pretty annoying. So if you just do that using modify, you just need to change it on one single place in the code, and it's changed. Okay. Next step is load the data. I have some dummy data already in, so that's just the budget table. That's what I explained on my slide. Let's go back there. That's number 4. Load the data, that's another function, it's OF load data. I just loop through that data store, that's IDS data. I retrieve it there with the year 2019. You might want to do a drop down in top to select the year, for instance, and then after you select the year, it would retrieve it and load the data for that. So I loop through that data store. I get my project ID and the month I'm in from the data store, and then I need to find the row with that project ID. Now, if I have my project ID, I can set the information set item on the row I found with project ID, and the month is obvious because it's months from 1 to 12. So if I have month 3, it's column 3. If you maybe display months from March to March, or from September to September, that's you would have to do a little bit of math, but that's pretty doable. Okay. So that's loading of the data. Then you need to save them, and that's in the item changed event. Well, there's many methods of doing the saving, and I've tried many of them. That's not yet here. That's just loading. Saving is here. There's many methods to do the saving. I think the loading is pretty obvious that you need to do that in the beginning. But the saving, you can do it in the item changed event. That's one way, and that's the one I actually recommend. You could also say, okay, in the end, when I press save, I read all the data from the visual and do a loop through it and write it back to the data store. That works, but I don't recommend it for 2 reasons. Number 1, you always need to update the whole table, and you don't want to. It's better just to update what really has changed, because it's you're better in control. If you have triggers on the database, you might run into problems, and it's slower. And the other thing, I experienced that it's pretty fast happening that you get your data saved wrong when you do it in one loop, just in the save when you press the save button. I don't know exactly why. I think it's maybe some Power Builder glitches. Maybe you did something wrong in your code, but I really often had wrong data saved when I did it that way. And with the item changed method, I almost have no problems. So just in item changed, you look if the name starts with amount in my case. If so, you get the column out of the name, getting by DWO the name, and then I changed data. I did an event for that. UI data changed. First, I need to find the corresponding row in the data store. So that's a find with project ID and month. I skipped the year because I only have 1 year, but that would be necessary too. And then I look if there's already a row in the data store. If so, I just set the amount. If not, I need to create that row first, so I do just the insert row and then some set items, so all data is set in the right way. Okay. So let's show that, save data. I'm gonna go in here, put the number like 7, so it should have created a new row in the data store. Now I save it, and just to show you that it's really working, that 7 is still there. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. Well, let's go to the advanced matrix. Actually, sometimes it's better to do a different kind of loading. In this case, you see the third line is missing. It's only 2. And if you look here, you see in the third line, the walls, we don't have any data. So it might be that you have a lot of projects, but you need to make a budget for only 1/10 of them. So you don't want to show all the projects, but there's just those you really need. And that's the case here. So what I changed here is, I need to go to the right Power Builder. What I changed here, that's the matrix 11, is the way of loading. So I don't retrieve the visual data window in the first place. I only retrieve the data window. So the init is slightly different. That's in functions. If I only could click. Functions. Load the data here. To get the row, I added the function of_getRow, and that function either creates a new row or returns me the row if it already exists. So let's get into that function, of_getRow. I look for the row by find, and then if it's 0, I just add that row by insert row, and then I do some set items because I need the project ID and the project name and so to be set. What I also added here is the priority. So we might want to have another information here, just priority. So that's a different kind of loading. And now in the next one, I'm gonna show you some advantages of this kind of loading. All right, now we have this one editable and this one editable. So you might you would be able, if I finished that, I would add a button to add a new row. So you can add a new row and then select the project from the drop down. Or maybe you can choose another way to select the project in a more user-friendly way. Okay, but just to show you here, I can now change that project. I of course can't change it to tables because that's already there, so it tells me I can't do that. So I'm going to change it to walls. Then I save it, and what it does in the background is it changes all those entries. It goes through all that entries on that row and changes the project ID. So that's what is done in the matrix 12. That's in the item changed, of course. So if the name is project ID, I check if this project exists, but if not, I delete and recreate for each day. So I go through all of my columns, then I say data has changed with 0, and then data has changed with the actual information that's in. So with 0, I just delete the rows from the old project ID, and then I create them with a new project ID. So that wasn't that much of coding, because I already had that event for if the data has been changed. I had to adapt it slightly because I wanted to be able to delete rows. So otherwise there would be orphans with 0 values everywhere, and I wanted to get rid of those. So it's if the row is 0, so row 0, I just give the row 0 if I just want to delete it, and the value 0. No, that's wrong. I'm sorry. Exactly. I try to get the row in the data store first. That's with that find. And if I don't find a row, that means this entry doesn't exist. But if the value's 0, I don't want to create it, because I just want to delete it. But if the value is not 0, I know I need to create a new item, a new row. And then second case is I have a row, so the entry already exists, but the value is 0, so it shouldn't exist. So I just delete the row. And third option, the row is bigger than 0, so the entry exists on the data store, and it should exist because the value is bigger than is not 0. So I just correct the value. So that's the 3 options you have here. Okay, and then there's another thing what I added. You can also update the priority. And that's what I did in this step. It's just some additional information. You could just do that using maybe there are several ways to do that. You could do it just update the visual data window. That would be one option. But thing is, if you add rows and delete them again and change the project ID and whatever, that might get confusing with the update properties and with the I just don't remember the names, but how PowerBuilder manages those properties, what has changed and what hasn't. So you work here in a very special way, so that might get some issues. You could also do that with embedded SQL, but in general I don't recommend that for performance reasons. In here that wouldn't be an issue, but if the table's bigger, that might be more problematic. So I just show the way I would do that, and in this case here it's not that much of an issue, but there might be other cases you run into where you need that technique. Well, it's not that hard. I just have another data store in the background for my projects. I retrieve that in the beginning, and then in the item changed here in the data window, if the priority has changed, I just go here. I just go to the project data store, then find my row with that project in. I set the priority, and then in the end I'm going to save that data store. So I'm sure it's going to work out. Okay. All right, let's go back to the slides. Go there. That was about joint information with the priority. I already showed that to you. So change project. So that was the thing to update update each entry for each column. Then the update of the priority and save that to the project table. That was what I just showed. Okay, that slide would have been in between. Anyway, now let's get to the graphical UI. It's just that's just a simple example on how to do how that would be useful with the project planning. So you might want to put in when to do which steps in a graphical way. Well, that doesn't look very good, but I think you remember the calendar from yesterday. So that would be the idea. So that's slightly different process for loading and saving. This one here is not a set item, of course, because you can't set item to a graphical UI. It's just generating of entries, and then if you change them, you need to set item back to the data store. So that's pretty much the same as in the matrix table with your drag and drop calendar or whatever. You have a visual data window and you have a data store, right? So you need to make sure they're at the same level of information. So in the beginning, you put all the information from the data store up to your visual data window, and then every time you change something or you create something, you update your data store. Okay, now how do we do that? How do we generate those entries on the visual data window? So to be able to do that, we first need to build a grid. When we draw the calendar, we need some grids. We need some like units, and we need to know where is what. So we usually have some available space. So that's just the size of your window, the size of the screen, whatever. That's the space you want to use to build your calendar. And then you have the units you want to display. In this example, it would be like a month, and you want a box for each day of the month. So you have 31 units, and you want to display 31 units, and you know how many pixels you have available. So just divide those pixels by the displayed units, and you get your pixels per units. And that pixels per units. In this case, it's pixels per day. That's a very important value you need to save in an instance variable. So, what do we do with that now? When we load the data from the data store, it's a little bit of math. We have our position in days, so maybe it's the 5th of that month. So it's a 5. The position in units. And then you have your value pixels per units. Maybe you have 50 pixels for each day. And then you multiply that, and then you get position where you want to draw. So you have your calendar entry, maybe starts at the 5th and ends at the 7th. So 5 times pixels per units, and then 7 times pixels per units, and that's the pixel beginning, pixel ending, like the X position, and then you can calculate width where you want to draw your calendar entry. So that's how you get to your pixel position. Now, when you draw something in the calendar, you want to save that back to the data store, and that's pretty much the opposite. You have your pixel position divided by the pixels per units, and excuse me. And then you get to your position in units. For example, you have you draw a new entry from the 13th to the 14th of the month. You have 13. You have your data window just knows you have drawn it from this pixel position to this pixel position. So you need to divide that pixel position by pixels per units, and then you get your day. You get that 13 and 14. And then you can, as soon as you have that information available, you can save it to the data store. Okay. Just before that, some additional information. When you draw that grid, you have 31 columns you want to draw. You divide your pixels by 31. And usually if you divide any number by 31, it's not gonna work out straight. So you have some rest. And now it's important that you're aware of that, because if you assume your whole calendar will be as wide as the space you have, it's not going to work out. There's going to be some space left in the right for that modulo of the pixel of your pixel width with 31, and you need to subtract that from your total width. Maybe if you want to draw something in the right, you need to be aware that where you need to draw that. Okay. For the demo for this, I'm gonna take the graph from yesterday, just to show you about the idea, what to do there. Where's the graph? I'm gonna take first graph 1. That's just how you create the grid. I had a very brief introduction to that yesterday. Today it's a little bit more. Okay. What I do first here is I define some variables. You might want to do that in a configuration table, or at least with instance variables, but you can also set it just here. So that's my X position. Well, the grid X, grid Y, subgrid X, and subgrid Y. So what's that again? Grid X is exactly. I'm just gonna show you the grid before to remember. Well, the grid X goes until 250. And the grid Y goes to 150. That's just the space I have. I want to show. You can even if you build a graph, you could even make those positions dynamically, so you know where your graph is going, and so you know how big the grid has to be, so you can determine from that. I just made it fixed with 250 and 150. And then the subgrid, that's the small gray lines in between. That's just 10 positions. It's 10 lines in between each dark line. And then I define the border at the bottom, the border at the left, at the top, and at the right. And next step is I calculate the width I have available. So if you get the width by data-window.width, you get it in PowerBuilder units. But to draw, I like to work with pixels because they're much easier. They're not different between width and X pixels and Y pixels are not different, but PowerBuilder units are different concerning which axis you use. So I convert that to pixels, and then I subtract the border I put in here. So that's my width I have available. Now I subtract that grid X and grid I know how many grids I'm going to do in X and in Y, and I subtract the modulo. That's what I told you before, with the border in the right and in this case as well in the bottom. And after I did that, I can just calculate the pixels per grid for X and Y. and that's the important information I need to draw the graph afterwards. Then drawing the grid, I think that's pretty much clear, because it's just a for loop to create some lines and some text. Okay. And then the interesting part is how is the graph created. So I need to go to the graph 2 for that. That's the OF draw graph. I have all my graphs, all my positions for the graph in a data store. So what I do is I made that function OF draw graph, and then I give a color for the graph and a data store with all the positions, starting from the first position, then the second, then the third, like just to make it a little bit visible. That's the first position, so it's 0, 0. Second position is 50, 50. Next position is 60, 90, and so on. That information is filled in another function. I think that's create demo graph. So that's where I add these coordinations to the data store. I have created a dedicated function, but this function does just the set item, so it's pretty easy. So when I draw the graph, I just need to loop through that data store, then get the information where I need to put my graph, and then make the translation. So I do the modify. I create a line. It's just some new line. Then I take I create the X position, so it's grid to pixels. I did a function for that translation. It's just grid to pixels for X, and then here it's grid to pixels for Y, for the Y axis. And I'm just going to show you that grid to pixels function. It determines which axis I'm using, if it's X or Y, and then it just multiplies my position with the pixels per grid X or pixels per grid Y. Plus it adds the border at the left or at the top. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. Now, just some informations I promised you yesterday about that shift calendar. It's just about what are the possibilities in doing a better UI, or putting a lot of information into a UI without making it ugly. So one thing is implicit information, saves some space. I'm just going to show that calendar in advance. Database connection. Let's just disconnect everything. Maybe it's going to work out afterwards. That's matrix, which was still on. I think that should work now. Okay. Let's get it to the right module. Shift calendar. Takes some time to load because it's really a lot of information that's in here. So you have the numbers, the text on it, which tells you something about how the employee should work, if it's night shift or so. Then you have the absence in the background color. You have the red, and you have the red circle for if there's an issue. So just in the slides. So it's just one tile per employee and date, one little tile. and that tile has some information: background color, red transparent circle, and the text. And that information is gathered from a lot of tables, a lot of entries, so you could show that for a lot of employees. And of course, to gather that information, that's not just stored in the perfect way to read it, because it's usually used for other stuff. So partially it's pretty hard to get that information. So it's a lot of rows where I need to loop through, I need to look into, and a lot of information to process. And so with that implicit information, with the background color, with the explanation above, and in the mouse over, you can save some space and display a large amount of data at the same time. With the editing in here, you can select and then set something. So I'm going to show that again. You can select, for instance, this employee was 6, so you can select that here, and the color is set, and that's in the calendar. And you can also change the shift that employee is working on. So you can even edit the data, even if it's in that compressed way. And if you move over it, you see in that info box a little more information about it. That's just some ideas how you could do some other GUIs.